Okay. Okay, so it says now we are streaming live on YouTube. Okay. Okay, so it says now we are streaming live on YouTube. Did you guys hear that? Okay.
Once you exit that YouTube window, it will disappear. It's just echoing on the actual streaming.
Good morning, Director Longoria.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm driving from an orthodontist appointment, so I didn't want to be late, but I'll mute myself.
Great. Thank you for being here. Good morning, Director Richards.
Morning.
Good morning, Vice Chair Grotting.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Couldn't figure out, they wouldn't let me unmute.
Oh, no.
Hey, Martha, good to see you.
Good to see you, Don.
You look great.
Thank you.
Good morning, Director Giles.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Chris.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Representative McLean.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Davies. Good morning, Director Gill.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Dijon.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Dunbar. Good morning, Director Gerard.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I had to find the right buttons.
No worries, I understand. Good morning, Director Rober. Let's see, did I get everybody? Good morning, Director Molnar. Good morning, Director Gamboa.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Barreto.
Good morning.
That will be helping as well. She's new to our campus.
Good morning, Director Warrens Brown.
Good morning.
Good morning, Director Clark. Okay, I think we have everyone. Okay, Chair Cusco, I think we will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Good morning and welcome, directors. I'm Belle Costco, your chair, teacher in the David Douglas School District, and it is my honor to open this last Educator Advancement Council meeting of 2021. First thing we have on our agenda is Elizabeth will do a verbal roll call to establish quorum. Elizabeth?
Directors. I'm gonna go ahead and start. Director Bell Smolnar,
Here.
Director Dijon,
Present.
Director Gill,
Here.
Director Rosiles,
Here.
Chair Koska,
Present.
Vice Chair Grotty,
Here.
Director Barreto,
Here.
Director Brown Warrens,
Here.
Director Clark,
Present.
Director Chris,
Here.
Director Davies,
Here.
Director Dunbar,
Here.
Director Gamboa,
Here.
Director Giles,
Here.
Director Gerard,
Here.
Director Juarez. Director Longoria,
Here.
Director Lynn,
Here.
Director Oaks,
Present.
Director Richards,
Here.
Director Rober,
Here.
Representative McLean,
Sorry, here.
and Efren Samudio. Okay, and we are at quorum.
Make
Yes,
sure to
we
mark
are
me
in-
here, Elizabeth.
For the record, I do think both Director Rosilis and Dujan can be marked X as present in our note-taking document there.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you
Yeah.
for attending. In the last 18 months, 2 years, we started a custom here at the EAC to open each meeting by sharing one of the essential understandings of Native Americans in Oregon. Comes out of Senate Bill 13, trying to spread this learning around the state. We'll need to revisit that soon as we're coming towards the end of the essential understandings. But for today, we're going to hear Mercedes bring voice to Essential Understanding 8, Treaties with the United States. Mercedes?
Thank you. So today we're on our 8th essential understanding out of the 9. So we're nearing the end of those essential understandings. And so today this understanding is all about treaties. So treaties refer to legal documents that were designated in the United States Constitution as the supreme law of the land. Through treaties, the federal government used deception and coercion to dispossess tribal land, people, wealth, economies, and resources. There are several key points that educators should understand about treaties within the United States, but I'd just like to point out just a few of them. And all of this is in the Essential Understands document. So some Oregon tribes were forced to relinquish their lands and enter into a trust relationship with the US government. And that trust doctrine is a federal responsibility to tribes that require the federal government to support self-government, economic prosperity, and sovereignty. Some tribes hold customary and ceded boundary rights to lands, and this continues their inherent right to fish, hunt, and gather traditional foods and medicines in usual and accustomed sites on lands that are outside of their reservations that are within those ceded areas. It's important to note that these inherent rights were not given to tribes, but they were reserved so that nations could fish, hunt, gather medicine and food, and pasture livestock. Many of these treaties were actually never ratified. The land was still taken, but the rights were never upheld. And it is noted that within our history that none of the treaties that were ratified have been fully honored by the US. And so these are just some things to know as we go forward and we see more and more news come into the spotlight that reference our tribal communities and their tribal sovereignty and how much history is behind tribal sovereignty in these treaties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercedes. Agenda item 1.2 is a chance to look over today's agenda and center yourself on our purpose. I see that in the chat you can find a link that Emily shared. Give you a minute or two to get your mind around today's short meeting and to let us know if there's anything that needs to be added. Any questions or additions? Thank you, staff member Emily, who is chatting me here that we forgot to add public comment into today's agenda, and that is something that we could modify right now. We don't have any requests, but it's still great public meeting practice to make sure that's in our agenda. Is that a motion to add to change our agenda? Somebody who's more parliamentarian than me could help me out here.
Move.
Okay, I believe Director Richard moved to add public comment to today's agenda. We can call that, oh boy, our agenda's out of order anyways here. 2.1 or 2.3. Is there a second to add public comment?
Second.
That was Director Dujon. Are we going to do a roll call vote on this? Let me pause for a second here and ask another parliamentary procedure. Can we move to the consent agenda and vote on the amended agenda? Or do we need to vote twice? Martha's showing me a thumbs up that lets me think we can do one vote here. Okay, so in that case, the next thing I believe we need to do is give you a little time to look over the October minutes, because we'll also be voting on those in the consent agenda item. If a staff member could drop a link now to the October minutes in the chat, that would give us a chance to review those. And I know some of us weren't able to attend the October retreat, so a reminder, you can always abstain if this vote doesn't apply to you. I'm going to give you about another 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and then we'll move to consent agenda item to do two things: to pass our amended agenda for today and to move our minutes into the record. If there's no need for discussion, I am prepared to take a motion to approve our consent agenda item, which is our October meeting minutes and today's amended agenda.
So moved.
I believe that was Director Lynn got in there with the first. Is there a second?
Second.
Did that come from Molnar?
I think yes, and somebody else.
Okay, well, for the record, we have Molnar in there first, and now we'll go to a verbal vote.
Okay. Director Bells Molnar,
Yes.
Director Dujon,
Yes.
Director Gill,
Yes.
Director Rosiles,
Yes.
Chair Koska,
Yes.
Vice Chair Grading,
Yes.
Director Barreto,
Yes.
Director Brown Warrens,
Yes.
Director Clark,
Yes.
Director Chris,
Abstain.
Director Davies,
Yes.
Recording in progress.
Director Dunbar,
Yes.
Director Gamboa,
Yes.
Director Giles,
Yes.
Director Gerard,
Yes.
Director Juarez,
Yes.
Director Longoria,
Yes.
Director Lynn,
Yes.
Director Oaks,
Yes.
Director Richards,
Yes.
and Director Rober.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Consent agenda passes. Which now takes me to our new agenda item 2.3, public comment. I will check with staff one more time, but I don't believe we have any.
No public comment today.
Thank you. All right, now we can get into some of the heart of our meeting. We'll be starting first by debriefing some of our trios. So most of us were able to participate in our October retreat. Then we had some homework to do between retreats. And I know it's been a chaotic time of year, and I checked with staff this morning, and about half of the trios have been able to meet. So we are going to do a debrief, and that doesn't mean that the conversations can't continue for those trios who have not yet scheduled common time that works. I know I want to just say thank you to my trio who squeezed it in on a birthday, and I enjoyed the conversations, and I am really looking forward to this debrief. So Director Kimberly.
Thank you. And if I can get the PowerPoint presentation to be presented, that would be great. All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So for our trio debrief, really what I want to do is some grounding, since we didn't have a lot of time to go over the kind of research-based framework that was pulled together for the October retreat that we had. And so I'm going to do a little bit of grounding. So for trios that have not met yet, that's great. This will just help add hopefully to the conversation to bring more clarity. But also want to talk about the why of looking at research and where is this going? What are we up to here? So hopefully build some connections for everyone. So just want to go back and anchor us, because I know that at each in my one-to-ones with directors, everyone has come in at different places. And so this is just really about calibrating our conversation around what do we know and understand what's happening around the state. So in terms of our policy goals, the EAC charge is really about the coordination of a systemic approach to continuously assessing needs and coordinating future priorities. We are also responsible for opening access to high quality, culturally responsive professional learning and supports. And then what I really want to highlight here is we have to also think about local context, as well as what does that look like over the stages of career for an educator. So it's not just a one-time or, a one-size-fits-all type of support. So we're really, there's a lot of supports that need to be varied and for different stages of a person's career. So it's not just about, okay, culturally responsive professional learning, just as the educator comes into the system. What does that look like at various stages? We're also charged with thinking about how do we support high quality educator preparation. That's ongoing, effective professional learning supports also for educators, and thinking about the critical variables to excellent teaching for improved student learning and educator retention, which we know are all very big challenges right now with the impact of COVID continuing to challenge our school systems. And then as we think about retention, we know we have a lot of people retiring, and recruitment is also critical, that we are promoting the profession of education, and how can we do that in ways that is really exciting for our future of education as we think about the improvements that we need to make, creating inclusive learning environments, and also really eliminating any institutional barriers that we have historically seen. And then the last piece is really supporting a vigorous and comprehensive early childhood professional development system that is culturally specific and language diverse. And so we really are talking about looking at how do we support the P20 education system. Next slide, please. So that's a lot to unpack. And so that's what we're going to try to attempt to do in our time together. So this is just kind of a visual of the touch points that the Educator Advancement Council has across our P20 system. These are all of the different agencies and entities that we will be interacting with and supporting. All right, next slide, please. And I think this really, is a great testament to why we have this council. We have a lot of representation from those different entities on our council, which makes it very unique in terms of how we partner together and shape the supports and the direction for the work. So I wanted to share this. This is kind of a mapping of our policy and what does it mean to move from policy all the way to practice. So we have our Senate Bill 182, the intent of that bill. And then we think about, okay, what are the strategies that have been identified in the policy? So statewide coordination of P20 educator supports and resources, the need to create learning networks that provide support for educator and also leadership development, educator preparation, recruitment, developing and retaining local educators, and then also scholarship and mentorship. Okay, so those are the strategies that have been outlined in the policy. The infrastructure that has been developed to support these goals is the formation of this council, our regional educator networks, which we have 10 across the state. Building a community of practice for educator preparation. We also have our Grow Your Own programs, and then our pathway programs with our Oregon Teachers Scholarship and our Oregon Administrator Scholarship program. So that's some of the infrastructure that we have in place to help us carry out this work. Now, when it gets to practice, so what does it mean to put this policy into practice? So we're looking at interactions. We know the highest influencer over improving student outcomes is the classroom teacher. There's no refuting that, right? And so the whole purpose of all of this work is to improve the outcomes for students who will enter. So once they exit the school system, they can be successful. So we are a student-centered aim. We have a student-centered aim. But what we know is that in order to improve outcomes for students, we have to look at the quality of conditions surrounding that being able to happen. And what we know is that when we look at the system conditions, there's a lot of work, right, that needs to be done. A lot of our educators across the state are not getting equitable access to the resources that they need to support the students well. So how can we support shoring up the barriers or the gaps in terms of access? And then we also know we, as continuous or lifelong learners, we need a system of continuous growth and professional development. And so we also see there are barriers in how we provide that in a way that creates equitable access. And then I think one of the pieces that we are still working on as well is talking about and creating conversation around instructional leadership. And instructional leadership is really looking at the interaction between school leaders and our teacher leaders in the building. And this is for the purposes of really scaling practice. So we can have great teachers in the classroom, but if we don't have a mechanism to scale successful practice beyond a single classroom, then it's going to be very difficult to make sure we don't have pockets of success. And we want system-wide success. So this idea of teacher leadership and principal leadership is extremely important. And so we want to amplify conversations around that lever and that practice. And then additionally, I think one of the biggest areas that we will be looking for in terms of creating equitable access is in our operations and resources and how we are allocating those. We are still hearing from rural areas and from different entities that we have not hit the mark on equitable distribution. So we still have a lot of work to do. So we're going to be talking about strategies for how we can mitigate against the inequities that we're still seeing. And then also another practice area is around continuous improvement and strategic change. What we are having conversations about is how do we create flexible systems so that we can be responsive as things happen. It's been sitting on my heart when I hear one of our directors talk about You know, when COVID happened, we didn't get a lot of training. We didn't get a lot of supports to help us to be responsive to that in real high quality ways. And so that's something that's been sitting with me for a while, and our team, we've been having a lot of conversation about that. So those are specific practice areas that we are paying attention to, being very intentional and strategic around, thinking how do we get better, what improvements do we need to make so that we can have culturally sustaining high quality P20 school systems. So I'm laying this work out because I'm setting us up for a conversation that we're going to have later on, but wanted to just, again, take the time to start calibrating around what is the EAC and what is our work in charge. Next slide, please. Okay, so now to the trio. So we,
Madam Director, this is
Yes.
Representative McLean. May I say something?
Absolutely.
This is a transition, and so I really want to say this before we go to the trio.
Okay.
First of all, I spent some time with the material that you folks sent out because EAC is part of the reason that I'm here and stay here. And the policy goals are a shared responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
And it's a nuanced finessing as we go forward.
Yeah.
And there is so much in those first few slides that you showed, and so much discussion to have there, and so many sort of, I guess I would say, loose ends in my mind.
Yes.
I'm just going to throw a couple of loose ends out that I brought to the meeting, and they were confirmed in the way that you presented that.
Okay.
One of the things that I didn't hear at all, but it's something that's very core to the work that I've seen done both by the local governance and student, school boards and also state and legislative work. And it has to do with grow your own.
Yes.
It has to do with how it's more important to work on growing your own and retaining folks that you encourage into the teacher facility programs or actually leadership. And so the grow your own is the basis for one of the last two things that you talked about, which was instructional leadership, growth and development, and really trying to make sure that we're encouraging people who are aides to actually look at being a teacher.
Absolutely.
And I want those words there. I want the grow your own words there as part of that retention and part of that recruiting and part of that developing equity and diversity. And that's one element there. The other thing is the last thing that you said, but I didn't feel that as you were going through it, was the flexible system that we're supposed to be creating with teacher voice centered.
Yes.
I didn't hear that in your presentation either. Teacher voice centered. And so to me, those words are extraordinarily important in the work that we've done in the last 5 years with developing this level and stage of EAC. And so I hope that we can keep my comments at least, somewhere on the sideboard to be able to go back and talk about what the trios talked about. If I was in a trio, I didn't know about it. And so I'm sorry if I didn't show up, but I care about this and I want it to go right. The other thing that you talked about in growth and development is all budget oriented. And that also is a shared responsibility. And so it's important for us to acknowledge EAC's role and map out practice for EAC, but to realize that policy and budget is a shared responsibility that is happening in more than one area, as one of your graphics so eloquently showed. The other element is, I don't see that part of the strength of this committee is just that EAC has a member of all those other groups on it. I think that is a strength. I see in this group, a strength is that this is supposed to be the voice of the centered view of the teacher. Because again, this is not a group to tell them what they need. This is a group to listen to what they need.
Right.
And to hear what they need and to experience what they need. And I'm all over everything else you said. but it's really one of those things where we can't remember why this group was formed. It was created to have a centered teacher voice.
Yes. And so I'm not finished. So we were going to get there. I'm just simply laying out the practices, the strategy, and the infrastructure, and wanted to really talk about the role of teacher leader, right? And the teacher leader is able to work with their constituents to help build. And so I think, and the reason why I say that, again, because we know there can be great practice in a single classroom, but how can that be scaled if we don't have infrastructure in which to build off of the successes that are happening within the classroom? But you also need structure and opportunities, because we know that that there are disparities, there are disproportionality, there are persisting challenges that we've had in our state and throughout the country that we're still working on. But if we don't have if we're not filling in these structural gaps to create access, to differentiate, because we cannot do a one-size-fits-all approach when the challenges are different in different areas. So that's why local context matters. So what I'm really just trying to lay the case for here is structurally, we have some gaps that we need to improve upon. We know that the teacher educator, because educator means more than just the teacher, the educator in the classroom is the highest influencer. The second highest influencer is the principal, who must create the conditions for the work to be able to happen. So this is really what we're trying to lay out. And we need to build off of the practices that we know are successful and where we're having success. And that's really what our policy lays out. So if you didn't hear me say that, I apologize, but this is where we're headed. All right, thank you. I think we saw one more hand. I can't see everybody.
I had my hand up. Mark
Okay,
Gerard
great.
here. I
Thank
had
you.
my hand up, but I'm happy to, Kim, I heard you say, let's go through the presentation. I'm happy to hold my questions till the end there.
Oh, no worries. Okay, thank you. All right, so next slide, please. So really what our trio conversation is about, we know that the highest influencer over changing student outcomes is the teacher. And it's really about looking at the interaction between the teacher, the content, and the student, which is what we call the instructional core. So you saw that during our retreat, we focused on two triangles. We looked at the students kind of triangle, but then we really needed to look at the broader system triangle. And this is where I wanted to really center our conversations and start digging into what is wrong, what's happening in the system that we're not able to create the conditions for success for everybody. Because we're an improvement science. We focus a lot on improvement science, and it says we have to look at the system. So where are the conditions breaking down? And that's where I really wanted us to dig into the conversation. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This is where we're going to start looking at. So here, when we think about, we know we have pockets of success. We need to look at that in alignment to, or in relation to, what's happening across the system. And so it's really understanding what do teachers know and are able to do in terms of supporting the diverse learner, and then looking at the differentiated classroom. So how the teachers who are really finding the success, what is it that they're doing? And then how are we amplifying their voice and creating opportunities for teacher leadership to scale those practices? And this is where instructional leadership comes in, because the principal cannot do this alone. And teacher leadership is a critical lever and structure, again, for scaling success. And the liberatory instructional leadership is really coming out of conversations that are happening in RINs. And that's really where we see the graphics we've seen, where we have the different students standing on boxes trying to, or young people trying to look at the baseball game. And the idea is that we want to remove all the barriers. We want to make sure that we have the conditions for everybody to be able to learn and thrive once they leave the school system. That's really what this is all about. I don't want to make this more complicated than what it is. It is a complex problem that we're trying to solve, simply because we cannot use a one-size-fits-all approach. So what does it mean to differentiate? In order for us to really know how to differentiate, we have to understand what is it that we're trying to accomplish. And this is where we are looking to dig in deep. And this is where I wanted the trios to start having conversations. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? But we need to know or be able to look at what is it that we've learned from the successes that we have seen across our system. So this is where I started digging in and looking at where have we found success. We have found success with teachers who understand how there are certain strategies and instructional models or practices that they use that we hear them talking about. So we're going to go to the next slide. We know that teachers, so we talked about flexible systems. We know that teachers who understand how to create flexible learning in the classroom, looking at flexible grouping, making learning relevant. There are a lot of practices that are learner-centered inquiry where they're not teaching to the test. So we hear a lot about that, but teachers who are not teaching to the test, they understand the art of teaching and the science of teaching. And so they're doing a lot of learner-centered inquiry. And the thing that I like about this in TSPC with out of Tony's office or out of Director Rosili's office is that there are a set of practices that they're really engaged in, and our TSPC has really outlined and identified that. And I know that our mentoring program, when I was in district, we used those practices that were identified by TSPC to drive some of the mentorship and supports that we were providing our new teachers. Because if we know that these practices work, then we want to replicate them. We want to give access to our young and incoming teachers. We want to give them access to that. So it was a matter of trying to figure out what is it that we have, what is it that we know that's shared across the things that we're doing that are creating success. That's another area where people may not have access to all of this information. But the other piece of that, is, again, is then looking at the practice level conditions. Do all of our districts and regions have the structures for success? It's not just about the content, but then the structure. And then our principals and teacher leaders working together. So really, it's just about unpacking that and what is it that we know and what is it that we don't know, and calibrating around filling those gaps in to build shared understanding and approaches so that we can have success across our entire state, which I believe that we can. TSPC has done an amazing job of really laying out what conditions need to be in place and what practices need to be in place, and also developing a framework for how leaders need to work with teachers. So, so that's what we wanted to begin exploring and anchoring to as we make decisions about how we allocate our resources, what structures we need to have in place, and then and how we do that by local context and region. Next slide, please. And this is, so when we configure those pieces out, when we lay it out as a blueprint, we can actually create culturally sustaining P20 systems. And this is all about knowing, doing, and being. So, and I know people are like, what does that mean? Maybe, right? These are words that may not be accessible to everybody. But we have this amazing partner that works with our RENs, and they work in partnership with community design partners who provide the technical assistance to our RENs, and they're called Dialogues in Action. And what we're really hoping to do and shifting towards is creating reports that describe impact. So Dialogues in Action are working with our regional educator networks to begin documenting the impact that our educators are having on changing the trajectory of success, moving from pockets of success to system-wide success. And then our hope is to really begin to build what we call practice profiles. This is from improvement or implementation science. So we're using a lot of research-based protocols here, but building some practice profiles to really amplify what teachers are doing to get success, so that again, we can move to statewide success and really just replicate what we see happening in particular regions and share that learning. So we want to move from just knowing and doing in particular regions, particular classrooms, to having a being, which is about systems integration. It's just a part of everything that we do. It's common practice because we've amplified that and made it visible for everybody. Everybody has access to it. It's not hidden information, that these are things that everybody should have access to and know, and now we can function as a healthy system. All right, next slide, please. So this is just really then laying out what we're hearing from the field about what we know has been working, that students bring a lot of assets, and our teachers who are able to use an asset-based approach to helping students connect to learning, that has been very successful in creating social emotional growth, also just being able to create critical thinkers and students who are able to interact with students and community in ways that are promoting positive and healthy school systems. And so it's really about thinking about multiple intelligences and the way that teachers are building upon the strengths of students. We also know that universal design for learning has been a practice in Oregon that has been successful. It's about creating multiple means of action and expression, engagement, and representation. Those are things that we've seen. So we're just highlighting a few of the practices in our state that we have seen success. And is everybody familiar with that? And then also schema building and really using actually different techniques to get students thinking and doing that deeper inquiry. A lot of it is embedded in problem-based learning or project-based learning, and connecting what's happening in the classroom to the real world. So those are the things that we're hoping you'll explore in TRIO to get calibrated around. And it's important to anchor, what do we understand about creating success? And then evaluating where we are as a system in terms of access to those practices, learning about those practices, and then creating structures, resources that will allow for the conditions to be put in place if they're not already there. Okay, next slide, please. So I don't know, I will take any questions now before I move into why this is important, why this initial conversation is important, and its impact on the EAC work and staff. Director Gerard.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really helpful conversation here, and the policy to practice map, very helpful, I think really lays out the full scope of the work here. One of the things that I think is that captures the essence of the Educator Advancement Council is that we are in the business of educator workforce development. Of course, we want to achieve student level outcomes, but we're doing that by pushing on the development of the workforce. And that's different. That's Oregon behaving differently in the way we've used our money over the last 2 decades that I've been paying attention, but that's really exciting. The map is fabulous in laying out kind of the structures and the buckets and kind of what's connected to what. I want to make sure, I have 2 points to make. One is I want to make sure that those buckets, that structure, doesn't inadvertently create walls for us. Educator workforce development will naturally bleed across those structures. You know, I worry right now that, you know, several of our RENs have very clear goals of adding culturally and linguistically diverse educators into their regions. Yet I have heard that there may be a misconception that REN money can't focus on the recruitment side, the pathways side, you know, that it needs to be all over on the retention, the community development side, the leadership side, the educator PD side. And again, those 2 things just, they won't stay in their buckets. You know what I mean? So I want to just make sure that our diagram doesn't contribute to the sense that there are boundaries in how we use the dollars. We need to blend and braid and make sure that we're pushing in the same direction. So that's one point. My second point is I just want to continue to kind of make sure that in this conversation that we consider that I believe that our state has a data problem around the educator workforce, right? We haven't had a comprehensive supply and demand report for, you know, more than a decade. I know the permanent directors, I know this is on their radar screens. I know our state is making good progress in the statewide longitudinal data system, but we're going to have to task some agency with comprehensive supply and demand report, just in the same way the Ed Equity Report has become such an important benchmark for our state, really useful information. We need that same level of information about who is in the workforce, who is leaving, where the gaps are relative to the kinds of educators in the regions around the state. Those are my 2 points. Thank you.
No, great. Thank you for that. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, we did invert the triangle, and you can see that educator preparation programs is essential, right? Because where the foundational practice begins. And really, when we can create alignment, so this is why we were talking about alignment at our retreat. One of the things that I know, so TSPC and EAC is working on a study now where we look at university partnership with districts to create a seamless system of progression. It's a progression of development. We can't just say, oh, you went through your program and now you have everything that you need. No, because putting it into practice on your job is very different. And so that continued support must happen with a greater sense of intentionality in those first 3 years in order for us to retain educators. I can't tell you, and I'm one of them, how important mentoring was for me to stay in. I witnessed burnout in my 2nd year, and I didn't even realize I was burning out. But if it had not been for mentoring, I would not have been able to sustain. And so what does that seamless progression of support? So TSBC and EAC have been working with university partners and higher ed partners to look at how do we align the learning in pre-service to in-service, right? So that there's that seamless progression of support. But yes, absolutely. And in terms of the funding, this is what we are doing an analysis of. We want to really look at how are we leveraging our dollars and resources to get the most out of the system as possible, because we know there are massive needs out there. And I think we're missing the mark in some ways. So our team is really doing a deep analysis, and they have found spots where we can do better. And so that's all about continuous improvement. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And the data piece, absolutely. So as you can see, when I sent out my update, that we are data focused. We need multiple sources of data to give us a really good diagnosis about what's happening so that we can differentiate better. We know that, again, in our rural areas, we're missing the mark there. And there are things with higher ed and early learning that we're missing the mark on. So we really need we need more data to do a better job of applying how we are supporting our regions. So I think Director Oakes was next, and then Director Lynn.
So one of the things that I've been grappling with, and I've been sharing with our REN and my district, and this fits so perfectly in the conversations I've been having, is that yes, we absolutely need to grow our own. We need more educators of color in front of our students of color. But we cannot recruit educators of color into a system that is not equitable and inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to be supporting the professional learning and the leadership in order to recruit our educators of color. If a high school student doesn't see the education system as equitable, that it's the content's applicable to them, they're not going to want to become educators. So we have to simultaneously fix the professional learning, the teacher practice, right? Those closest to the students, making the impact on student learning. So we have to support that professional learning as well as that leadership piece. So that's something that I'm trying to work with. We can't have one without the other, or else we're going to recruit and they're not going to stay.
Exactly.
And so really upping our game around the professional learning piece. And then the other piece that I've been thinking around the teacher, the RENs, to Mark's point, is teacher voice. And when our aim statements are around growing our own and recruiting educators of color, for 51% of our teachers who are on the RENs, that is so far out of their scope of influence. How do they impact that?
Mm-hmm.
Versus that's more of a district HR level work. When we think about our teacher influence and the purpose of them being on the RENs, we need to bring that closer to what they know and what they need, which is around professional learning, equitable practices, and things like that. And so those are just some things that I've been toying with and sharing with people around how do we look at all of these pieces. And there is no chicken and egg, right? And so we have to figure that out.
Great. Thank you so much, Director Oakes. And you're right. And these are the tensions, right, that have to be resolved. And I think that's really why this idea of teacher leadership is extremely important and a critical lever. And so I'm really excited that, that TSPC even has a program for teacher leadership. And so we'll be talking about that at a future meeting. But what I really hear you saying, it's not an either or, it's a both and conversation. We need high quality learning experiences in our educator preparation program, because that's going to set the teacher up for success. And then on the retention side, this is why we can't stop the support. It needs to be a seamless progression in order to retain them. So it's our partnership being in alignment that's going to allow for the recruitment and retention to happen. Director Lynn.
Thank you. I really appreciate the way we are actively engaged in conversation all the time now about who we are, what we do, how it's connected to the policy, and how that then is connected to the various practices. And the way you laid that out, I think, really helpful to me. Michelle said something that I think responded in a way to the question that Senator McClain raised earlier about teacher voice. And I just wanted to sort of recapture that in a way. And then I'll also kind of think about what Mark was saying. the RINs, which is one of the critical investments, right, for the EAC, that is the vehicle for elevating and lifting up teacher voice. That the RINs are structured so that they are mostly teachers and that they are designed around teacher need. So we need to not forget about that. And maybe Dr. Mateer, there might be a way to bring that out, right, more in future discussions about the RINs and sort of what their place and their role is in terms of the teacher voice element, because I think that's where it shows up, right? And I think we might find ways to draw more on what we are learning. And I agree with what Michelle said too, that is also the place for teacher learning to happen, really, which is designed around what teachers say their needs are, right? And so they get to articulate what the needs are and then structure a professional development sort of continuum based on that. And so that's exciting. And I just want to just remind us about that. And when I think about recruitment in terms of the support for teacher ed, I think about the Grow Your Own piece, where there's also another significant investment, right? And I know that Portland State benefited greatly from being able to draw on the support and resources that are available through the Grow Your Own. And so I feel like we're getting to a place as an organization where we have a clearer understanding of what our purpose is, and I can clearly see these vehicles in place to sort of lead us toward that purpose in a very strategic and direct way.
Thank you. Representative McLean?
I can keep this really short. I really agree with everything that Marvin just said, as far as all the elements of how wonderful it is. And Mark said this too, to have a plan and have, a graphic that is really laying out, how are we going to do the things that we said were important? How are we going to do things that we say are necessary to improve the overall educational system? But the one thing I think it's important to remember, and I agree on the RIN part too, Marvin, that's where a lot of this can happen. But we have to remember that we're looking at it through filters of pandemic and possible future pandemics. We have to remember that we're dealing with it through hybrid types of experiences that just 2 years ago, we hadn't had at all. And when you're talking, Director, about the successes we've had and trying to make sure we're not just having pockets of success, but I have a system of success, I agree 150%. But again, if we want to have teachers who want to stay, they have to feel creative. They have to feel like they can problem solve with individual students that they're centered on in their classroom. And we have to believe, and we have to make sure that flexibility doesn't mean that the state or EAC or TSCP or anything else. I mean, we have all of these acronyms and all of these agencies, and they just want to feel like they do still have local control and the opportunity to honestly make this a creative job that is a caring job that's centered on every student being different and successful. And that we do that with equity and involvement of a wide variety of workforce. I don't want any of my comments at the beginning to think I am all of a sudden switching horses. This group is going to help be the glue that helps keep it together. And so I feel that sincerely. But again, sometimes when you have been a practitioner and you come back to a meeting like this, where we're really talking about way up here, all the things we've researched and all of the things that we think we know are successful, it has to be, again, an ongoing process where we are tightening up. We are looking at new circumstances. We're looking at all of the status quo and how can it reflect on what the future looks like. And so I'm sorry if I was a downer for 2 seconds, but I just want you to know I agree with the majority of the comments that have been made during this discussion, and thank you for letting us have it.
No, thank you for engaging. Everything is critically important, what is being shared. And I want you to know that we also hear that teachers are saying we haven't had access to the learning that we need. And so they can only problem solve as good as the knowledge that they have, right? And so it's again, we have to create a system that is a both and, it's not an either or. And teachers are saying, and what they understand is, I need support, I need development. And this is what we're creating the structures for. Where we have teachers who have been very successful, we have teachers who were able to be responsive in times of COVID. Why? Because they brought a certain skill set into that pandemic that other teachers didn't have access to. So how do we learn from that and grow that? See, we have to be able to know what to scale. And we can't say that everybody has all the information that they need to problem solve because they've said, I haven't had access to the information that I need. That was the thing that hit me about one of our classroom educators that's on our council. They didn't get what they needed. And so it made it difficult for them to respond in times of COVID. So we have to make sure that they have access. And we can't make assumptions that people have what they need to do the problem solving that they need. We have to create the structure, the content, and the access to make everybody successful. Director Warrens-Brown?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, so being a Black educator in Oregon, thinking about the trauma that our Black students face at the hands of educators, I think having that space for them to have, that teachers have a voice is important, but also including the student voice as well, creating that space where students who do want to be educators can challenge this notion and change the narrative, because we have a lot of students who are like, I can do something different, but where is their voice? Where do they have an opportunity to put into the lesson space, this is what I need, right? And so I think this is why it's so critical to build culturally responsive leaders, because the reality is the numbers aren't increasing quickly enough as our student demographic is. So we need to think outside the box and say, how do we teach our educators to advocate for themselves, but also leave a space for our students to advocate, because culture is key. And if we want education to change, and if we want more people to come into it, then there needs to be a culture shift. Like, I need to be able to see, I can make a difference. I can do something for my community and for everyone else around me. And so I agree with everything. And I just think it's really critical that we include the students, because they're the ones that we're asking to enter into a profession where they have been silenced from pre-K to 12. If I've been silenced that long, I don't want to come in. So my question is, how are we going to provide that platform and give teachers that confidence to say, your voice matters, because you are going to be the face of our change and we need you. We need more of you. And so that's what I wanted to put into the space. Thank you for allowing me to share.
I love it. Thank you so much. And that is our litmus test, right? The litmus test, the outcomes that we're looking for is that all of our students, especially our historically underserved, are thriving, that our entire system is thriving, that we don't have disparity, we don't have disproportionality, and we don't have predictability in outcomes. That's the litmus test. Those are our metrics. And that's why we started with the student. It wasn't to make the teacher voice absent, but the whole purpose of school and schooling and the work that we're doing with teachers is because the adults are responsible for the outcomes that we have. And so this is, again, not an either or, but a both and conversation. I just want to do a quick time check here, because we do have, okay. We have, I'll take the last comment from Director Lynn. I'm going to do a quick little introduction for a conversation we're going to have at our next meeting. And then, and we'll move into a presentation from our Department of Justice. Director
I just
Lynn.
wanted to thank Trinice for reminding us of what this is all about. This is about student success. And when we talk about teacher voice, we're talking about teacher voice, elevating teacher voice for the purpose of student success. Absolutely.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to just jump back in. Thank you, everybody, for your feedback and your comments. This will be an ongoing conversation, and we're going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. This is about being outcomes driven. And thank you, Director Juarez, for your comments. And so we're going to, if I can get the slide presentation back up, just make sure. So one of the things that, the reason why I'm trying to lay out our work before the council is because we are going to talk about the needs of the EAC in terms of staffing to be able to accomplish all of this work, to be able to provide the right level of service and support in terms of the vast and variance of needs that we have across our state. So we are putting forth a proposal to add some additional staff. And the reason why we're asking for that, we have 4 staff. We have Elizabeth and myself, or essentially doing a lot of the administrative oversight and function, but I think we have 4 staff that's supporting this varied, right, expansive work, and the level of depth and complexity in which we need to move, we need additional staffing. So we need to build the capacity to effectively implement on our strategic priorities across the system. And I'm going to say by region, by local context, and understanding the variance of needs. We need to be able to coordinate equitable funding resources. And so as variables are changing, we have to be responsive in the same way that Representative McLean said, as things happen, we need to be able to be responsive, right? And then we need to design and sustain a learning organization, because this is about continuous improvement. And we know that variables are dynamic. Sometimes they're unknown, as well as constantly changing. We got hit with a pandemic. That was an unknown variable. But there are ways that we can still be supportive and responsive, even in the midst of an unknown. And so how do we create a system like that? We do have research that tells us how to do that well. And I want to say that we also have practice. We are not all theoretical. We have different experiences and being able to accomplish this across our team. And that's what I loved when I shared my first update. We did a strengths finder to look at how much diversity do we have on our team. And we have a lot of diversity even on our small team. Next slide, please. So we've been doing a lot of thinking about the structures, the functional structures that we need to do the work that we need to have done, that we just talked about. So you will get this, all of these materials shared with you, so you'll have time to digest and ask questions. But this is a functional chart. In the orange is our current staffing, and it's 1 person for each orange area. Okay, what we're going to be requesting are 3 program and resource developers, and that is about articulating the different types of programs that we need, right, to understand the student experience, the teacher need, and looking at what are the differentiated structures and program and resources that we need at every level of the system along the continuum of educator development. And then what's the professional learning also that we need. So we're looking for 3 professional learning facilitators. We do have vendors who provide technical assistance, but they're saying the variance in need is so great, it's very difficult for them to be able to provide that level of differentiation. And so to create a more sustainable structure, it's better to have some staffing that can provide continuous coordination and support and development across the regions that won't fluctuate. In addition to that, to Director Gerard's point about data, We need more data. We need multiple sources of data to get an accurate diagnosis of need in terms of what people are saying they need. Again, listening to our biggest indicator if we're doing well or not, which are our students. We need to improve on our data systems. And so we're asking for a data and research analyst and manager. And then we know information is power, right? One of the ways that we keep people in positions of disempowerment is when they don't have access to information. And so we really need the communications support as well. And then lastly, we're asking for a grant analyst in order, if we're going to begin differentiating our resources better, we need a grant analyst to help us do that. So we're going to go, this is just a quick introduction and overview. We'll send this out because of time. We'll send this out so you can generate and have questions, but wanted to link these two conversations to you. We're trying to be very intentional and strategic. We believe we can hit every single goal laid out in the policy with your support. And so we look forward to this continued conversation at our next meeting, where we will go deeper and spend more time on this in relationship to all the questions and comments that we had in our earlier discussion. Next slide, please. All right, so the next steps is that we've submitted a memo to the legislature of interim ways and means. It would take about $5.6 million for us to add this additional staffing. We have about 20 million in rollover that was unused because of the impact of COVID and other challenges. So we want to take 2.1 million for the additional staff. And then we also at the retreat voted to increase the capacity funds across the RINs to do some of the data work that Director Gerard talked about. And you approved that for 3.5 million, which we voted on already. So we have time to have the discussion about the staffing portion at our next meeting. We may look to add a meeting in January just to simply go over this, and then also for our next discussion around some additional needs. Okay, I think that's kind of the big introduction and overview. And so I think we'll be ready to turn it over to the Department of Justice for their presentation.
Thank you, Kimberly. I'm here. I'm back.
Okay, good. There you are. I was like trying to find on my screen.
I know. So many little windows.
So appreciate everyone's engagement, and we have the Department of Justice with us, and I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of share with the council your goal for today.
Sure. Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you everyone for letting me pop in and take some of your time this morning. I promise I won't take too much. Some of you may know me already, but for those that don't, my name is Jake Hogue. I am an Assistant Attorney General, big long title, and I am the contact counsel for a variety of state agencies in the DOJ General Counsel Division. That includes several of the education agencies, not all of them, but I do a lot of work with our early learning agencies and also K through 12 agencies. And as of just a couple months ago, I am now contact counsel for the EAC. So I am your attorney, and that is why you get to see me here today. Just as a introductory matter, and I know that this may be a rehash for some folks and maybe brand new for others. So I just want to maybe run through a brief overview of the EAC as I understand it, my prior involvement with the EAC, the agreement that helped to stand up and govern the operations of the EAC. And then I'll take a deep breath. If there are any immediate questions, feel free to pepper me. If there are any questions that, and there may be many of them that I'm not able to answer right off the top of my head, I might direct you over to Dell and see if we can get some of the questions addressed that way. Just so everyone knows, and again, some of you know this already, I was one of the individuals who was involved in the initial drafting of the EAC Intergovernmental Agreement. And really what that means is I was one of many different attorneys who came together and tried to find some way to stand up this novel thing that we call the EAC. The EAC, and you know this well, is unlike any other governmental body that I'm aware of in Oregon. And it's unique for a variety of reasons. It's unique because it is not a state agency, and it is not strictly part of the state. And that was by design. It's unique because it functions through an intergovernmental agreement. The membership of the council is governed in part by statute, but the council itself has significant flexibility in deciding how it wants to constitute itself, reconstitute itself, and govern its operations. That makes it unique as well. And it's also unique, and I know that you folks know this well, it's unique because of the sheer variety of voices that are at the table. And again, that was by design as well. So what all of this means from a legal perspective is that the council, the work of the council happens at maybe 3 different levels. We've got the statutory level, and you guys know what statutes are, right? There's 2 statutes that lay out direct the creation of the council and then describe generally what it's intended to do and how it's supposed to go about doing it. And if anyone wants to go look those up, it's Oregon Revised Statute, ORS 342-940 and 342-943. And if you don't want to look it up, that's okay. I don't blame you. The second level that the EAC functions at is that of the Intergovernmental Agreement that creates the council. And that's really where I want to focus, because the Intergovernmental Agreement, as it exists currently, was designed to stand up the council when we were trying to do that 2 years ago. And the thought process and sensibilities that governed the current terms in the agreement, right, were all based on that goal and the understanding that the council itself, once it was stood up, was going to find ways to govern itself, was going to get a better sense of how its operations needed to work. And that's all a really long-winded and fancy way of saying it may need some updating. And the council is the entity that in the first instance gets to do the updating. Of course, any changes would need to be aligned with statute. You can't do anything in the IGA, in the agreement, that is in alignment with statute, but you've got a more or less blank canvas, and you can paint in broad strokes or narrow strokes depending on what the intent and what the goals of the council are. Just some examples of items that were put into the agreement, frankly, without knowing exactly how the council was going to work, are things like terms. How are terms set? What are the length of terms, right? What happens if somebody leaves during the middle of a term? What happens if somebody wants to stick around for longer than the agreement currently allows? We thought about a lot of those issues initially, but frankly, we were not in a position to have good answers. And I think everyone agreed at the time that those were the kinds of questions that you, as the council members, would be better positioned to answer. But that's one example. You know, there's other things that could be more formalized, like if somebody, and you're allowed to do this, changes jobs, right? And the seat that you previously occupied no longer reflects the work that you're doing in your professional life. What's the process to change that? And I know that you folks have made it work, but that's another example of something that can be cleaned up, clarified in the agreement, just to avoid any confusion, and ultimately to make sure that the administrative side of things runs smoothly so that you guys can do the real work, which is what Dr. Mathieu was talking to you about earlier. I'm just the window dressing. I'm here to make sure that behind the scenes everything happens, and make sure that you guys are able to do the good work you need to. So I'm going to pause there because that was a big information dump. I think it might be helpful, and we can do this by maybe just a show of hands if you know how to do that in the windows. How many folks have read through the Intergovernmental Agreement already? Okay, thank you. So unscientific polling, I'd say about 60% of folks have read through the agreement, and that is totally fine. We will make sure that we get you a copy of the agreement, and I think it's important. You don't have to understand everything in the agreement. I think the bigger point that I would like to make and emphasize is that if you don't understand something, you can ask. That's what I'm here for, and that is the first step, I think, in finding a way for you folks to take control of any changes that need to be made to the agreement. So don't worry if you read through it and you don't understand it. That's what I'm here to help with. The other thing that I just wanted to say generally. Oh yeah.
Can I just interrupt for just a second? I realized that I didn't frame really why you were here. I didn't even just get my mind there. But I do want to say, and thank you for sharing that. I think the reason why this conversation is important as we think about the work ahead, we know that there are things that happen that we have no control over, but we want to create as much stability as possible with our council as we seek to do this very, very important work. And so the more stability that we can create, the better. And so Mr. Hogue is really here to describe some what flexibility or what options do we have to create that stability. We've had a lot of movement. When I talk with the directors one-on-one, a lot of you were still feeling new. And I know we think about 2-year terms a lot, but we know in the research it says it takes 3 to 5 years to make significant change. So is 2 years enough time? So those are things that we want to be thinking about. And Mr. Hogue is here to help us say what options do we have, what flexibility do we have to operate differently. Thank you.
No, oh, absolutely, and that's exactly correct. I mean, I'm here, hopefully, to, at this point, and this is all I really wanted to do today, flag for those folks who didn't know that we have this intergovernmental agreement that governs the work of the council. The next step, of course, is figuring out how that aligns with your vision for the work that you are doing. Because ideally, the agreement is there to facilitate the work of the council. It's there to make sure that you don't have to worry about the administrative side of things. You don't have to worry about the procedural side of things. And you can just focus on building the council and sustaining the work that you're doing. So the goal from my perspective, from a legal perspective, is to find a way to make the laws work for the EAC. Find a way that any legal hurdles can be identified and addressed. And so I largely take my direction from you guys. You are the ones who have, I mean, it's overly simplified, I'll admit, but the good ideas. You are the ones who have the good ideas about the work that you want to see done and how you want the work to be done. And that's the role of the EAC. And my job is to just make sure that that work can happen in the way that you need it to. I'm here as a resource. I don't necessarily have answers off the top of my head, but we can track down answers. And the idea is long-term to get the council and the council agreement to a place where you don't have to come to me all the time, where you don't have to, see me popping in at all of your meetings. That's when I know that I'm doing my job, when you folks have been set up for success, and everything is working the way that you intended. Yeah, Veronica.
Thank you. As I listen to you, and I must admit it's been a while since I looked at the agreement, with the level of semi-autonomy or autonomy that I think I hear you describing that the EAC would have to engage in some of these transformative changes that we would like to engage in, I'm anticipating from my own experience from my agency that there might be cases where what we would like to do might not be consistent with some of what state statutes allow. So I'm assuming you and the DOJ would assist in helping us figure out how to be effective and do what we want, even though there might be tensions or disagreement about what we can do.
That's exactly right. And as I mentioned earlier, and you've actually given much better context than I did, we always have to consider state statutes. State statutes ultimately govern the work of the council, and the agreement fills in gaps. It describes the work of the council in a way consistent with state statute. That there can be instances, and I know Representative McLean, you are on the council as an ex officio member, but there may be instances where legislation might be needed, and that's something that I can help to at least identify the kinds of changes that might be needed. Ultimately, of course, the decision and policy choice about whether to pursue the legislation, how to tee all of that up, does fall to the council and your administrative support at ODE. But yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I would be here to help everyone navigate.
Other questions or comments for Jake? I think I see DJ with a hand up.
Yeah, so just to clarify, we still utilize like Elizabeth Castillo as a step between ourselves and Jake and the support he provides. That's the expectation.
Yes, it's totally up to you to figure out how questions filter over to me. That is, I'd say that's usually how state agencies do it, and some of my other clients handle it. But just to be clear, that is something that you can discuss internally and figure out what works best for you.
Representative McLean?
Well, I just wanted to say that I don't think that your lawyer that came today to see us is trying to say that there is, anything other than the fact that you should be guaranteed that he is your lawyer. We have a lot of other lawyers that the legislature and ODE and other folks use from the Department of Justice, but Jake is your lawyer. And so you have his legal ability to really be able to help support what you're trying to achieve, or as a council feel it's important for you to do to carry out your mission. The one thing I do want to say is I was here, and so was Martha and a few others, we had 25 to 30 minutes in one meeting to review that particular intergovernmental agreement. I never was happy about that. And I felt that the partners that we were actually making an intergovernment agreement with shouldn't have been very happy either. And they honestly told me, look, I had one chance to talk to my board about this. So I'm going to tell you, just as a ex officio member, that I think it's important that that is reviewed. And if you haven't read it, read it. And if you have read it, read it again, because there are some things in it that I think are awkward. And I think that they're not particularly productive. And there actually are some ways to, I think, carry out the statute much better. But I'll also tell you that as a budget chair, at least at the present time, I'm also going to be reminding you that I have responsibilities that I have to help balance the budget. And Dan Rayfield and I talk all the time, and Kimberly needs to get me that slide right away, because the short, I don't know if you've ever been through a short session, but it's good, bad, and ugly as far as timing. And so I need that now.
Okay, great, thank you. I think one of the reasons why we wanted to start this conversation is just for, as Representative McLean, shared, that I'm trying to get an understanding of the IGA. And as I think about our work ahead, I'm wondering what kind of improvements can we make to help us do the work that we want to do and need to do. And so one of those pieces, and one of the questions that I do want to bring before the council, is really about the terms of our membership, because we don't want to lose the historical knowledge. We have, terms that are ending, succession, like we're trying to gain momentum, and how do we not lose the momentum, because it's very difficult to get momentum, and once you get it, you don't want to lose it. And we don't often think about the knowledge that leaves when a seat becomes vacant. And so we really need some strategies, and in the interim, are there things that we can do not to lose the historical pieces and the knowledge that might need to be retained during times of transition. So those are some things that I really want us to interrogate and look at and think about. How can we make our IGA stronger and better for the work that's laid out before us? And so Mr. Hogue was really just kind of initiating that he's here for us, and that he can help clarify where there may not be clarity in our documents as we make decisions. Are there any other questions or thoughts?
Director Dujan, I think you had a hand up, but did you take it down? Anybody else?
It was
Monica?
hand up, and I think I got too much in the weeds in my thinking. Because I was anticipating the way my agency works with DOJ, or the offices I'm responsible for. We do have an understood process of how we approach DOJ, because we do incur expenses for the services we use. And I'm wondering if, as we engage review of the agreement and we come to some decisions about areas that might need some cleanup, if we might have a process of how to do that, because it's possible that as individual directors, we might approach Mr. Hogue, and then the EAC would get the bill.
Great, thank you for saying that. Yes, actually, you can go through me, and then I will work with Chair Koskela to review those, and then we can set the agenda for discussions or whatever is needed to work through all of the feedback and questions and things that come in. But we do want this to be a process that we go through in a very meaningful and intentional way, to make sure that we are hearing from all of our directors and thinking about our collaborative work together. So if you can go through me, then we will figure out a way, and I will work with our chair to do so.
Martha?
Hey, Jake, this is Don Browning Beaverton. I'm wondering if there were some legislative action that had to be taken up with the sessions coming up. Is there timelines that this committee should be considering that if they were going to do something, some deadlines that you would suggest?
So I think there's two answers there. Yes, there are timelines and deadlines, and Representative McLean may actually be able to speak better to those deadlines than I could, because there's always the official deadline, and then there's the slightly less official deadline, and then there's maybe even third deadlines out there. I would say that if there are legislative changes that the council as a body wants to consider, the timing would be very tight, especially in a short session. And this is absolutely something that we can revisit, but just as a practical matter, I believe that most agencies have already submitted, agencies and also other stakeholders have already submitted their requests for legislation. And I don't know that we would be able to put something together for the short session, but absolutely this would be the time to start thinking about changes for the long session. That's a really good question.
Thank you.
Chair Cascella, this is Director Richards. I remember Representative McLean that we had a half an hour to review it at the meeting, but I will say that as Chalkboard and a number of other organizations working with the agency heads of each of the bureaus worked tirelessly behind the scenes to craft that document. And the challenges of the document were in the setting up of the council. It was not in the continuing of the council or in recognizing sort of historical knowledge represented by anyone appointed to the council. So I think that there are some things that it merits reviewing and determining what would be appropriate to make changes to. It was a document that was, I mean, I think the reason we only got a half an hour is because it had changed within the previous hour before it came to the council. So it was one of those documents that created an enormous number of bodies who worked on it from a variety of different locations because of its unique nature. So I think it would be a wise thing to put together a small group once everyone's had an opportunity to review it, to kind of look at what needs to be changed so that the agency can operate more effectively. There are a couple of us old people who are whose tenures will end in this year, in 2022. It might be useful to have a couple of them and a couple of new people kind of sit down and take a look at it and come back with some suggestions. It's a really long document, as I recall, with many, many pieces of language in it. And each piece of language has a history, which hopefully I will have forgotten by the time I review it again. So I just want to be clear that while we didn't have a lot of time with it, it was chewed through by lots of people prior to coming to the council.
Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful and important. And I think we definitely need to do that. So thank you. Can't see.
Director Dujon?
Thank you. I can't.
Thank you.
It's hard to see what hands are up. So
No.
Kimberly and I are both.
Mine is up. I did put it up again. Director Richards, I really appreciate having that background of how the agreement came to be and the amount of work that it took. Sometimes when new members come on sometime later, there is no historical context for the language choice or how things got written. And having that understanding or background can really improve our understanding of what what the intent was and how we should think about it. It's really important when we do have an opportunity to do another review, as we're discussing right now. There is a chance for areas that might seem pretty straightforward, but there was a lot of thought that went into it, and we might miss the significance if we don't have that background.
Thank you. There's one other hand, but I don't. Let's see.
Madam Director.
Yes, Representative McLean.
I just wanted to say that I agree with Martha 100% that it needs to be reviewed. And I agree with Jake that trying to get it in during this session would be really, really hard. We've got 2 weeks on each side of so the House gets 2 weeks to do their work. And then we have to trade with the Senate. That's it, 2 weeks. And we're limiting bills like you wouldn't believe. And the second element is that I agree with Martha on the fact that there were a lot of people that reviewed that, but we got some complaints at the legislature that it wasn't a public review. And there's some elements that have to be discussed about that this time, especially when this is an ongoing, continuous type of group that we want to keep here. And so you have relationships with ODE, and so I want to talk to Colt about that as well. And there are some shared functions that you deal with Colt. And so there's a lot of elements to deal with. And I know that you put in for $2.1 million. That was in the chat. The paperwork went in. I think it was Emily that said that. But again, there's much more nuance about some of those, that one screen that you had of the 10 folks that you were looking to add for staff. And so that's where I'm hoping you and I have a meeting soon.
We do.
Okay.
This week. Yes. Tomorrow, I think.
All right. Good. Excellent. Goodbye.
Martha, is your hand still up? No. Are there other questions or comments related to our IGA? Kimberly or another staff member, do you want to let us know sort of what we're thinking next steps on this topic?
Yes. So we wanted to bring back some recommendations. So we're hoping at our next meeting, we're going to bring back some recommendations for consideration to the council about needs that we have from the council in terms of, again, membership, keeping historical knowledge. What are some strategies? We do know that, terms are up. And so we're wanting to get a sense of, what is the willingness of people to continue to serve? And, and if so, how can we, what are the things that we need to do? We also know that we had some seat changes that we voted on. And so some of the clarity that we were trying to get, does the term start over if you change a seat, all of those things. And so there really isn't, firm clarity within our documents that helps us to answer those things very clearly. And so given that the council has the ability to make some of those decisions, these are the questions that we're going to bring before you, have discussion around, and then have you vote. And then I really love this idea that Director Richards brought up about, voting or bringing together a committee of new and historical perspectives to really kind of shape and bring some thoughts back to the full council about how to move forward, because there's such momentum and work around. And I want to share with you all, let's say, I think I'm in my 4th month in this role. And I'm trying to learn a lot. And so I may miss things and I may not understand all the processes, but my eye is on the prize and I'm mission focused. And I really need the support and partnership, because we know information is power. And so a lot of times the information that I get, I'm reading through documents, I'm having to make my own interpretation of things. And I don't have access to everybody all the time. And so one of the things that that I've been trying to do as I've been reading and trying to learn about the historical decisions and bodies of work that has been happening, not trying to start everything over new and fresh, but continuing what was already in place. And so a lot of the work that we're trying to do is just take it to the next step and go deeper with that work, even with the staffing. There were conversations that were happening about that before I came on board. And so I'm knowing that our timeline was short, trying to execute on that. And so if there have been any missteps in regards to not talking to or communicating with the right people, I just going to put out here publicly that I apologize for that. But things move very quickly and we didn't want to miss opportunities. We knew that we could have the conversation later, but we needed to get the procedure in there. We were following the steps based on what the information that we were given. So I really look forward to continued conversation around the needs to be able to really execute on what this council was created to do. And that's really all that I care about. So again, I appreciate the conversation and the engagement, and thank you, Mr. Hogue, for being here with us today. And I'm going to check with you, Chair, to see, do we want to try to add a short meeting in January? Is that something that's possible for us to specifically focus on these two conversations and go deeper and take some votes on next steps?
Yeah, so that you all know, it's still, well, you know this already, it's still a pandemic. And we're still having a hard time getting quorum for more than a couple hours. So we have had conversations, Kimberly and I, about instead of these day-long meetings every other month, can we look at 2 to 3 hours monthly? Or we need to do the work, and we also need to honor what everyone is doing outside of the council and making sure that we can get to quorum. So we have had conversations perhaps about adding another short meeting in January. But knowing that we're all very, very busy, maybe it'll start with a doodle poll, because if we can't make quorum, we don't have a meeting. So I think probably there will be some communication that comes out after this meeting asking about people's availability.
Chair Gala, this is Martha. Is it not possible to have just a discussion, or do we have to only have quorum? This is another thing that we may want to change in the Intergovernmental Agreement, is that it's impossible for us to have a discussion unless we have quorum.
My understanding is we can discuss without quorum, we just can't vote.
I would say, though, that is an item that was given some discussion when this was initially created, there's no reason why the council couldn't change that, or at least clarify the circumstances when discussion can happen as opposed to voting. Absolutely, that's an item that you can look into and revise.
Another potential change to our IGA, I think. Are there any other questions or comments related to the IGA? Because I see in the chat here that there is one more important update to share before we close at 11. Jake, thank you for your time and expertise and ability to explain in layman's terms.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I really do appreciate you giving me almost willingly your time, and I do look forward to chatting and working together. Take care, everyone.
I'm not sure what this chat means. Are we going to talk website?
We are going to talk website.
Yay, Angela.
Good morning. I am going to just take a few minutes to announce a website redesign, and much needed. So this is part of a general overhaul that we're doing to our communications assets to refine our messaging and reinforce our channels of communicating and learning. So I know we just have a few more minutes before at the end of our meeting. So I'm going to get right to the ask. And that is that I'm hoping to get some user feedback from you as we enter into our website redesign, which we now have our contract in place and we're ready to get started. So this feedback is going to be included with some additional feedback we're going to get from our REN coordinators and some of our other primary users. And all of that is going to help us guide our efforts about what information to prioritize and what information that you would like to see on our website. So I'm going to drop a link into a short survey, and we're going to take a few minutes during this meeting since we all have it set aside to do this. So here's the link. It's a Google survey. Hopefully everybody can access it. And while you're doing that, I want to let you know that we're hoping to have a draft by the end of January. So we have a very aggressive timeline. And we plan on engaging with a focus group that all of you are invited to be part of sort of the group that looks at the new design before it launches. And if you're interested in being part of that group, there's a place at the end of the survey to drop in your name. And then I'll reach out to folks and plan a short, like 30 to 60 minute meeting with you and the other users to look at the draft when it's ready before we launch and do like one more round of adjustments to the website. So I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and let you look through the survey. Oh, let me fix that, Belle.
I think, Angela, it would be changing that to select all that apply, and then we could pick multiple audiences if that's what you intended.
It is. I changed it to checkboxes. Google doesn't have the same usability as SurveyMonkey, which I'm more familiar with. So hopefully that worked.
It updated on my end instantly.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yes, please, if you don't mind completing it now, that'd be great. I know it gets, everybody is very pressed for time. And as soon as we leave the meeting, this will be the last thing on everybody's priority list. So I'd love to spend a few minutes just getting answers now. So it's 10:54. I'm just going to give 2 more minutes and then we'll move on. about 1 more minute. So I'm gonna start talking again, and just if you haven't finished and want to think about it a little more, this survey is going to stay open until the end of the week. So you're welcome to continue doing this at another time. Please remember to submit so I get all your feedback. And then I wanted to also do a quick reminder, since we are redesigning the website, one of our pages is the council director page. And we'd love to make sure we have updated biographies for everyone. So I'm going to drop one more link in, and this one that we've sent out before, and that is to a Smartsheet form for collecting those biographical information. So let me see if I can, there we go. And there it is. So if you wouldn't mind, if we don't currently have an updated bio for you, please fill out the form. And I will hand it back to Belle.
Thank you, Angela, and thanks for all the hard work that's going in behind the scenes to make our resources, materials, and communication better. Is there anything for the good of the order before we close this meeting? All right, be watching for follow-up, which I believe will include today's slides with all of those graphics that many of us connected to and can see ourselves working, using out in the field. Maybe some communication about our availability to add some shorter meetings in the new year. And some other resources related to today's meeting. Many of us are in or about to go into a holiday season. If it's a time of holiday for you and your loved ones, I want to wish you rest, recuperation, and time with the people who lift your spirits most. I want to thank staff under the leadership of Kimberly for keeping their eyes very much on the prize. Thank you to Jake, who joined us today and brought information very useful to our future work. And thank you to every director who's here for the students. See you in the new year. I call this meeting closed.
Thank you. Wish you well.
Thank you.